Hello, Tatiana. How are you?
I thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, good, good. We'll pretend we didn't have a private chat earlier just to say how everything is. But yeah, we were supposed to have this chat on Thursday, but you had your corona injection.
Yeah, I had my vaccination. Well, my first dose, I did.
Okay, and you're half my age. How did you get that and I didn't?
Well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. No, no, no. Um, like I said, I didn't realize I was on the priority list. I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, which makes me which means I can't eat gluten, and I got a text message from my surgery to say, you're being invited for your vaccine. And I told my friend, and she said, "Oh, this must be one of the scam messages that people are receiving." So I called my surgery up and I said, "Is this a scam?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Right." I said, "But why am I getting called so early?" And she goes, "Because you have an underlying health condition." I said, "I do." She said, "Don't you?" And I thought, "What, my celiac disease?" And she goes, "Yes, that makes you high risk." I was like, "Right, okay." And you were planning to tell me when? The
Wow.
it's risk because if you have celiac disease, you may have spleen damage. Depending on how severe your celiac disease is, there could be parts of your smaller intestine, your lower intestine. I might get this wrong. That's been slightly shredded, so you have to be very. So that's what makes you, I guess, high risk.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, I mean, yeah, a detailed medical explanation for that. But first start, okay, which vaccination was it? And secondly, how did you feel thereafter?
So I had the AstraZeneca vaccine.
I hope you had lots of alcohol as a blood thinner.
No, they did ask me, "Are you on thinners?" I was like, "No." I had the Astra vaccine. It was all fine, and in fact, no queuing, no nothing. You just walk into the surgery, you give your name out, there you go, and then you get your vaccine and you're out. Um, and I was absolutely fine. I had no issues, and then I think it was around 10 o'clock that evening, I started feeling a little bit weird, and then I started getting severe pains and then shivery and all this stuff. It lasted for about, I'd say, 24 hours maybe. I was back to normal by about 9 the next evening.
Okay.
So well, and I had severe headaches the next morning. The headaches didn't start until the morning, and they lasted throughout the day. Although I was telling my friend yesterday that I still had headaches yesterday, like very light, but I could feel it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this is why I didn't want us to do this podcast on Thursday because I thought that those pains might kick in earlier. There was obviously also the added thing that Manchester United was playing, and I thought put the two together, it just makes sense to postpone it. So I was almost correct with
Yeah.
regards to your suffering. So not quite, but I'm glad you're over it. Hopefully the next dose will not be quite as problematic for you. Um, but yeah, I mean, so are you worried at all because of the issues that seem to be emerging now? So I've read today that Ireland has also suspended use of the AstraZeneca vaccination. Had you heard of that?
No, I hadn't. What happened?
Yeah, well, the same thing that they've suspended it in other countries in the European Union as well, to say essentially there appear to be issues with blood clotting. And yeah, so they've just suspended it temporarily so they can carry out further investigations. It's the official line, I think. So, yeah, watch this space, basically.
I mean, I read the other day that in the New Scientist that the World Health Organization said that it doesn't cause blood clotting and it was fine. So that's interesting that Ireland's done that today. But I mean, it was a question that was asked. I mean, there were two or three questions that were asked. Like, obviously, do you have any flu-like symptoms? Um, are you trying to get pregnant? And do you take any blood thinners? And of course, all those answers are no. Um, but that's interesting that Ireland's done that today.
Well, at least that's what I read in The Guardian. So if there's something wrong, you can blame your old colleagues. But I mean, I do find this a bit concerning. On the one hand, obviously, it's something that could be a problem in other vaccines, or perhaps it could be what's the best way to say it? It could become more problematic once the second vaccination is also introduced. But this also gives people who are essentially against the vaccine basically ammunition, doesn't it? It just says that, look, see, we told you so. Stay away. You don't know what this is. It's experimental medication.
Well, it's not experimental medication, because enough people have been tested for the vaccines, enough for them to be approved. They wouldn't have been approved if there was a real severe risk. I mean, they've done all the sort of checks that you would do, and don't forget, like, everybody reacts differently to vaccines. I mean, I've been talking to different people who have taken different vaccinations. My friend took the Astra one in Cyprus, and she had similar symptoms to me. My friend took the Pfizer one in America, and she's had no symptoms, but she was told that she would get them in the second round. So it really does depend on I guess which one you're taking. And Johnson & Johnson, I didn't realize that the Johnson & Johnson one only requires one hit.
Yeah.
So I actually attended a talk that the UK Cyprus Medical Society organized with this guy. His name is Dr. Kassianos, and I'm going to have to remember. He's the head of the UK's public health something. Find it and I will confirm it. But he was talking about the vaccinations and stuff, and trying to appease people. But I guess the truth is, and you and I spoke about this last time, you're not going to, well, no matter what happens, the people who are opposed to the vaccine are not going to change their mind. That's just not going to happen. So he is so Dr. Kassianos, George Kassianos, he is the lead national immunization lead and president of the British Global and Travel Health Association. Okay. So anyway, he was the one who was giving the talk, and he insists that it's safe. I mean, when I say that, I really genuinely do not believe they put something in the market that wasn't safe. If you look at the numbers already in the UK of how many people have been vaccinated, and I'm using the UK as an example because the UK is predominantly using AstraZeneca and of course Pfizer. There's 15 million people to date that have been vaccinated in the UK. We haven't really had that many adverse reports, which therefore indicates that, from a sampling perspective, it's generally safe. Now, of course, it's going to affect different people in different ways. And if somebody I wouldn't say that it's causing a blood clot, and a lot more needs to be investigated to identify why some people are suffering the blood clot. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's linked to the vaccine. But again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't comment, with any authority. But I would say that whatever happens, you're not going to change the anti-vaxxers' opinions. These people are just never going to. They're not going to get. I know people who are anti-vaxxers, and they're just not going to get vaccinated.
Okay. I mean, I'm with you. I would take the vaccination. It's just this does give some people pause for thought, and others who are already sort of prejudiced against vaccinations. This more sort of emphasizes whether we like it or not. As you said, you don't believe it's possible that they would put medication onto the market which was not well tested, but that's a trust thing, and you trust the system. I trust the system, but there are many who feel that trust is lacking, and so therefore it's, as you said, it's difficult to get people to budge from these entrenched positions. Anyway, okay, moving on. Last week you had an event. Or was it the week before? Would you care to enlighten me as to what this was about and how it went and what your role was and all of those wonderful things?
Yeah, of course. So we hosted our annual World Ocean Summit, this time virtually because we couldn't do it in person. It was really, really well attended. We had over 8,000 people register, 6,000 people participating throughout the week. It was a 5-day event, and it started from 12-ish all the way through till about 5, covering off different areas of how to accelerate the ocean economy and looking at the different industries. So shipping, fishing, aquaculture, tourism, plastics, circular economy, and of course energy. So it was a very, very well received event. We had a number of distinguished speakers participating in the discussion, anything from zero carbon emissions to for the shipping industry to removing harmful fish subsidies to how to basically feed the future and the role of aquaculture, and of course innovation in plastics and recycling. So lots of number of different topics. Great speakers: Ray Dalio, Ted Danson, who, my gosh, still is as handsome as ever, yeah, I mean, it was just a fantastic event.
Okay, and I mean, I read recently that there is an issue with regards to obviously overfishing in certain areas, and that one of the main, should we say, perpetrators of the overfishing is actually the European Union, and that some of the suggestions that the European Union has made with regards to applying quotas and so on doesn't go far enough. Do you see overfishing as something like a long-term problem for the aquaculture and generally this particular economy?
Overfishing is a really big problem because it means that you're sort of diminishing the supply, and you're diminishing the health of the ocean. And it's not necessary because you're not sourcing for what you need. You're just oversourcing, and you're concentrating on key areas where you could have sort of distributed it more fairly. The other thing, of course, is that there's a lot of illegal fishing that goes on, and that again is very harmful to the industry and to people's livelihoods. So. And of course, the health of the oceans again. So, all of these things, they need to be, we actually had a discussion around this, and when it comes to the fish, the discussion was, well, we're providing, governments are providing subsidies, but maybe the subsidies are focused on the wrong areas, and they need to kind of be focused on different parts of the supply chain. Obviously we've still got to look after the people that are receiving benefits, because there's going to be losers, but how do you sort of overcome that? Now, this particular discussion has been, this subsidy discussion, this agreement has been ongoing for about 20 years. It's a 20-year trade agreement negotiation. And last year was supposed to be the deadline. They were supposed to finalize it. All countries were meant to agree on it. WTO is overseeing it, so it's under the WTO's, authority. And that didn't happen. And some would say, oh, it was because of COVID, but of course there's an unwillingness within different states. So they're hoping this is the year. But it's very much, all of these issues, the problem is that with anything, it's like with the zero the shipping industry becoming 50% carbon neutral by 2050, I think the ambition is. Some people say, well, we could do it much sooner, and we can actually do it now, and we could be, 100% carbon neutral by 2050. It's always the challenge of the will, and it's not will as in like they're just not interested in doing it. It's just that people are benefiting from things the way that they are, and to do some of these things obviously requires innovation, it requires investment, and if you don't really know where the investment's coming from, then, you're less likely to be supportive of it. And of course, there's industry pressure, and the impact on your overall economy. So there's different issues, and all of these things need to be addressed in their own way in order for everybody to come together and say, yes, okay, I agree with this. And like anything in life, nobody ever agrees on everything.
Yeah, this is a big part of the issue. I mean, I've also read in numerous articles about how, for example, China is supposed to have a limited fishing fleet, but actually their fishing fleet is about 3 times the size of what they've been officially permitted to have. So the question, therefore, is begged, even when a settled agreement is put into place. Who's going to enforce it?
Well, I mean, it would be. I mean, once all of these agreements, like with regards to the subsidies, once it's enforced through the World Trade Organization, it has to be implemented by each state. Like that's a given. Otherwise, you're in violation of global trade agreements, and you do get penalized for these things. Like it's not just. This is an agreement, and if you don't do anything about it, nothing happens to you. With regards to China, they engage in a lot of illegal fishing, and it's a serious issue all the way from West Africa to
South America and the South Pacific. Obviously, I believe I've read these fishing fleets extend almost around the globe.
Yes, and they play, and they completely do. I mean, it's very difficult, and I'll say something. In the absence of true leadership, and I mean, from America in the last 4 years, it was, there wasn't really an emphasis. I think that these are things that this administration is going to take seriously. China's a really, really big player. It's very difficult knowing how to address these issues, because they don't acknowledge that this is what's going on. So this is again for global leaders to negotiate and to come together and figure out a way to prevent this. But I know that the South Americans, because I have a friend of mine, she runs an NGO in Ecuador. She's a lawyer, and I think she was a former vice president. I think she was former candidate for vice presidency. Anyway, she runs an NGO, and she shared with me a document that she shared with the government on this issue. Because it does endanger the livelihoods of the local fishermen in Ecuador and islands.
Yeah, I mean, I've read that there is an agreed international sort of zone around each country, which says they essentially, that water body, whether it extends a mile or 2, I don't know exactly, it falls under the regulation of the country. And then further out to sea, that's sort of open international waters, or that which is considered to be international waters. But even so, in these international waters, there are quotas that need to be observed by specific participatory partners. It's very difficult to control, isn't it? Because these areas of these bodies of water are vast, and it's impossible for them to be constantly overseen, isn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, this is again some of the biggest issues that exists with the oceans, because as you say, you're right. In the international waters, what goes on in the high seas, right, is unbeknown to most people, and there's no authority. There's no real authority. Like you have the international, what are they called?
The maritime courts.
Yes, I mean you've got those types of UN institutions, but they're not they don't do anything, and they can't enforce anything. And in fact, there's a really good book. You've just reminded me. There's a really good book by a guy named Ian Urbina. He's a former New York Times journalist. He gave up his journalism job to start reporting on what goes on the high seas. So he actually wrote a book. I will find the name and I will share it. But anyway, it was about all the illegal activities on the high seas. including things like, you wouldn't believe, I mean, abortions, where in some countries it's illegal, you can do that there, or the criminality, the piracy, all of those types of things. Like, I guess people don't really hear or read about these things, but there's a lot of illegal activities that go on, and we need to better man them. Unfortunately, the amount of investment that has gone into the ocean compared to space is negligible. And I find that really interesting. I've always found it very interesting that we're so fascinated with what's outside our own planet rather than actually trying to figure out how to keep this planet healthy. And we need more data. So there's a lot of satellite imagery. The ships obviously collect a lot of data. Even the planes collect data. But this data is not shared very often, or it's not accessible enough to all. And there's a lot of new technology that's coming out to help these things. But there needs to be better collaboration. And I'm actually working on a project around this particular topic of data, which is how to sort of putting the case forward for more shared and open data. Now, there are people that are already doing a lot of great work. Like there's this organization called Global Fishing Watch that works with people like Google who supply them with software to track, fishing around the world. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's no clear solution at present, I would say.
I mean, there are rules regarding transponders, but obviously some fishing fleets, when they enter a certain area, they switch off their transponders. And so it's very difficult to track them thereafter. So there are unfortunately lots and lots of deliberate ways of avoiding detection. And the thing is, as you say, the seas suffer, fishing supplies suffer. It's a shame to consider them supplies. Wildlife suffers greatly. And the consequences will be felt by humanity, but unfortunately, so far down the line that our grandchildren perhaps will suffer first, and by then it'll be too late to change anything.
No, it's true, but there's a lot more work going on how to sort of create this sustainable, what we keep saying, which is a sustainable ocean economy, because the blue economy is huge. Like its contribution to each country's economy, to most countries' economies, is huge, and it has a lot of growth potential. But like everything in today's world, everything needs to grow sustainably. It's not about just accelerating growth, at any cost. It's about accelerating growth, but in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I think this element, measured growth, is a principle which we don't often find easy for us to handle, because there is a certain eureka moment that you have with progression and innovation, and unfortunately, it's difficult to hold that enthusiasm back, especially when you've got huge investment partners to satisfy at the same time. But yeah, okay, and this is definitely a conversation we're going to have again, because I find it intriguing, and any additional attention that can be brought onto it, even with my 15 subscribers, I think is more than necessary to do so. I wanted to talk with you especially also about International Women's Day and gender politics, gender equality, and so on. But as we're going to have a big discussion about that with Ani as well, so there'll be the three of us, maybe we can leave off the details. But I've got two issues which I really would like to hear your opinion on. One of them is just perhaps your thoughts, but this extremely, how can I say, saddening case of Sarah Everard, that has come out since early last week, or I think it's Monday evening that she disappeared. People around outside of the UK might not be familiar with the fact that she appears to have she left a friend's home, and then she's somewhere along the line met this policeman who was perhaps off duty, but anyway, kidnapped and he's been accused of having kidnapped and murdered her. And obviously there's been an outpouring of anger and grief, frustration in the UK. Can you just perhaps explain the mood a little bit and sort of tell me what people are saying about that?
Well, I mean, I'll go by what I've seen on social, and I'll include myself in this. I think most of us, I mean, my girls and I, we were all like, all the girls we've all been texting each other, going, "My God, poor girl, poor girl." And can you imagine? And some of my friends are like, "Well, I would never have walked from the park down to Brixton," and then others were saying, "Yeah, but probably." And I was saying, "Well, she probably did that all the time, and it wasn't probably an issue." And then my other friend said, "Oh, isn't it amazing that in London there's so many cameras that you can actually track people and so on?" I think most of us are just shocked, not just because it's a police. I mean, yeah, it's also that he's a police officer, but that I don't know that these things are still going on. That somebody could walk and targeted that way. I mean, we don't know what happened. I don't understand what happened, to be honest. I don't understand how they've identified this police officer, what this role of this woman was, whether she was known to him or not. Maybe that's why they knew who he was, or maybe he was known to the police. But I mean, we still have to wait for the information. But I think, a lot of times, and this is true with a lot of cases. There was another case I read about the other day about an ex-army officer woman who was killed by her boyfriend, and he had been arrested or he'd been cautioned to stay away from her. I can't remember the details. And then he managed to get to her and he killed her and so on. And what shocks me is that a lot of the times these suspects are known to the authorities and they still are able to just roam freely and, attack and kill and do whatever it is that they do. For us, it's just a proof that there's not enough work being done. And then there was this interesting thing. So the Guardian published this UN Women UK-based survey that surveyed young women in England and in the UK, shall I say, and asked them whether they'd ever been sexually harassed. And 97% of the respondents said yes.
Yeah, I read that. Unbelievably, yeah, it's more than disheartening. I can only imagine how it must feel for the women.
Surprised it's not 100%, to be honest. I think that 3% is an anomaly. But I posted it, and then this guy messages me, and he goes, "I don't believe that." And I was like, "Why?" I mean, I'm sorry, are you a man of, like, you have the authority to agree or disagree? And that can't be true. I don't know men like this and that and the other. And I said, "What do you define as sexual harassment?" And, again, like the fact that we're having to educate people on the basics of what sexual harassment is very concerning. Now, I don't know what happened to Sarah. I don't know how this, I mean, it's just awful what happened to her, whether, she was walking and he was harassing her and he didn't leave her alone, or someone that she had maybe met on an online app. I don't know. But, in any case, it's sexual harassment is a really big issue in the UK, not just in the UK, globally. And the fact that men still don't realize that, like, maybe you don't think that you're a sexual harasser, let's say, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that other men aren't doing it. And by the way, your mates could be those people, but you just don't know that. I'll never forget, we were in a club in Napa when we were younger. My friend's kid sister was with us. This guy, I'm not even joking, he literally tried to grab her crotch. And I didn't see this. My two other friends saw it and went ballistic. One of my friends was about to punch him. And we were all girls, by the way, but she was like, she's badass. And about to punch him. His friend runs over and he's like, "What's going on? What's happened?" And then she's like, she was like yelling. And he pulls his friend aside and he like told him to get the fuck away. And he was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But that's just because we reacted. He could have potentially done that, walked away. His friends wouldn't know any better. And we would have been just like pissed off the whole night. Right. And that's just the reality of the situation. You don't know what your friends are like. You assume your friends might be as decent as you, but they're not. And that's the thing. in bro culture or boy culture, and even women, the way women talk to men about other women, we've got to be mindful because we're putting something out there that makes men think that these things are okay. Like, it's not okay to catcall. It's not okay to follow a woman when she's walking and tell her how beautiful she is, or, where's your boyfriend or whatever. If I want to talk to you, I will talk to you. If I don't want to talk to you, walk away.
Yeah, there should definitely be an element of rules of engagement, as it were. Okay, communicating that you are interested in somebody, I think that should still be allowed. You should still be able to compliment people, but there is there should be a cutoff point, and that cutoff point should be very, very soon in the conversation. If somebody doesn't respond positively to your compliment or to your inquiries, then, as you say, walk away, because anything more than that is discomforting, to say the least. And depending on the language you choose, it could be a lot worse than that. But I'm obviously, we have to wait, so we don't know exactly what's happened. The situation will be clarified. What I found very curious was that in the 70s, when the Yorkshire Ripper was doing what he unfortunately did, and for quite a long time, the police came out with a strategy, and they said to women, basically, don't go out on your own. Yeah. And the women's rights movement at the time, which was developing and growing in strength, that they refused to take this on board, because they said, look, we've just started this fight. The last thing we're going to do is connect our independence to a man, because the police said, if you want to go to a bar, get a man to go with you. And when this occurred with Sarah, a similar statement came out that I read by the police, which was, we advise women not to go out on their own. And immediately I thought to myself, it's been 50 years since the Yorkshire Ripper, and have we not progressed beyond this? As in, there must be more that can be said than simply telling women not to go out on their own.
I mean, I think that it's interesting that you're saying this, because this is what I was saying to some of the girls. I was like, it's really sad. I feel like we're still touching on the basics. Like, we're still having to justify to men that we're getting sexually harassed, that these are serious issues. My friend told me a personal story. So I put something on Instagram after this conversation, and I posted stories, and I've had lots of different women respond to me. Like, this one girl says, I'm teaching my 5-year-old what no means. And my other friend said to me, I was in a club and this guy came over and he grabbed my boob. And I then he started dancing, and he pulled his dick out and was like dancing around. I was like, whoa. And then when she told her friends, her guy friend turned around and said, well, why didn't you dance? Like, why weren't you around us? Like, it was her fault that this guy sexually harassed her. I was like, no, that shouldn't be what your answer is. Your answer should be, that's terrible.
Absolutely.
Not, you could have avoided that had you just been dancing around us. So, and this may be going back to maybe your question, I don't know, but go to the pub with your friends, fine. But what about when you're going to the lavatories and some guy follows you, which, by the way, happens, or you're at the bar getting a drink and this guy's harassing you and your friend's chatting up another woman and he doesn't realize this. These are not practical advice, and this is not the way that society should be. Men should do better. We should be educating men on these things. Of course, you're going to always have your perverse, your twisted, your ill people. Like that, this doesn't go away. My mother says it takes all types to make this world. But if more men were aware of the signs, then maybe they would do more. I've had a lot of experiences, but I'm gonna give one which was the one that, I don't know, at the time made me so mad. And I was thinking about it yesterday, and I was like, it still gets me mad. I was on my way to Notting Hill Carnival, and the Central Line gets jam-packed as you're trying to get down to Holland Park or anywhere near there. And I was on the Central Line, I got on, and I don't know, why was I on my own? Oh, I think I was meeting my friends there. Yeah, I was meeting my friends there. Anyway, so I get on the Central line, and it was completely rammed. I like push my way in, in this really rammed carriage. Yeah. And there's this older guy standing right next to me, and he was like very accommodating. He was like, come, come, come. So I jumped on, and I was like, thank you, thank you. I was like, thank you. And then the train doors close, and he's like right in front of me, and then he's just like being too in my face. And then he tried to kiss me, so I was like, excuse me, like old, like nasty looking man. So I was like, excuse me. And I tried to push away, and he kept coming closer. And by the way, the carriage is full of people. No one is doing anything. They're just staring. And I remember getting off the tube at the next stop and jumping out because there was nothing else for me to do. I couldn't stay on, and nobody was telling him to get off. So I jumped off, and I started walking because I thought, screw this, I'm not getting on the next tube. But it really pissed me off. And there's so many, similar incidents, not just my own experiences, but other women's experiences. And people just stand around and do nothing. They're just staring. I'm like, what are you staring at? You should be reacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that more than infuriating. I remember once I was in Parma in the park. It was a wonderful day, and my oldest son Alexander was over there with us visiting, and he was riding his bike around the park, and all of a sudden, for no reason whatsoever, I just realized there's a guy lying down in the park, and there are some movements in his midriff that I could see from a distance about 50 meters. And then I sort of panned to my left, and I saw that there were two girls sitting there. It must have been, I don't know, early 20s. So this gentleman was obviously decided that a day in the park, lying down on the green, was the proper place for him to masturbate, and I just lost it. I ran after this guy, effing and blinding. He probably didn't understand a word that I was saying, but he got the gist of it and sort of packed up and ran off. But unfortunately, about 10 minutes before I'd seen him, there was a carabinieri on horseback riding through the park. But when I actually went looking for a policeman, I couldn't find one. And these people, they either get very, very lucky, or they seem to simply know the movements of the authorities when it comes to evading them. But yeah, I think you're right. There are too many examples of, I'm no hero, by the way, but there are too many examples of cases where people don't support others. And this is why I think what Keir Starmer said the other day in Parliament was that this is an issue that men must also be vocal in. Okay, when we talk about gender equality, that doesn't mean that we have to leave it to the women because it's their problem. It's our problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem of humanity, and I'm more than happy for women to take the lead, because I think in many cases, not justice, they know best. But I definitely want to support, and that's why I make it an issue of our conversations that we have. And yeah, I think we should try to give people opportunities to express themselves, and if there are organizations out there which have plans, policies, or some kind of program to help with this kind of barbarism, then we should give it voice.
I just kind of, but again, it's like anything in this world, like how do you address, like, this is such an endemic issue, and I just don't know how you go about. I mean, look, imagine a country like the UK where I'd like to think, I mean, we do have a high illiteracy level, but I'd like to think developed country, proper institutions, and so on and so forth, and we are still suffering from these problems. Now, you take a country like India, where the issues are just as bad, and you think to yourself, well, if England can't get it right, how do you expect India to get it right? Or how do you expect other countries? It really does concern me how global this issue is, and how bad it is, not just in the developing world, but in developed countries as well. It's quite concerning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before you were talking about data, you were talking about creating global network or relationships with regards to the blue economy. I think this is something which also requires global movement upon. And hopefully, with some of the horrifying stories that come out there, people like Sarah may end up, inspiring a movement a bit like George Floyd did last year, albeit too late for them, unfortunately. Okay, I did want to talk about another issue as well, which is related, but I don't want to, go too far into your Sunday afternoon. But to just very, very quickly, and then we'll have a better discussion of it, perhaps with when Annie's around as well. But in the case of Meghan, I don't want to get too deep into the issue because I think we will have better opportunity of doing it the next time we talk. But do you think the British press should know better?
Is that a rhetorical question? Yes, percent. I mean, Jesus, how can you be so tone deaf? I I was actually having this discussion with a colleague of mine because she was watching it and she said, "Oh, I don't really read the Daily Mail. I don't really see it." But she's like, "I watched that documentary." I'll be honest, I haven't actually seen the documentary because I don't, as I've said, I think in the past, I don't own a TV. But I have seen snippets and I've read summaries and so on. I was saying to her that, I guess even if you don't know the headlines or you don't read those papers, I was like, I find it very interesting that people don't understand or realize that how racist some of these papers are. And they may also not realize that their prejudices and discriminations are coming out in words. But, there's a lot to be said think about how you use your words, and the way that they've portrayed Meghan as this sort of like, I don't know, gold digging. Is she a gold digger? I don't know. How do they present her? Gold digging, fame after something, whatever. Oh, let's highlight the fact that, she's got a troublesome family. Let's highlight. I don't know. It's just the way that they present her is just very, very strange, right? And I'd say that she and Kate, if you were to compare them English and American, like just from a lifestyle perspective, their backgrounds are not that dissimilar. Like her father, okay, slightly dissimilar in the sense that, Kate comes from and her parents never divorced, but both of them had good educations as children. They were raised, well, they went to good schools. I think the father was a lighting director or whatever. I just don't understand like why there's so much emphasis on Meghan's background, and we don't really, and I don't even remember this happening when Kate was marrying Will, that much emphasis was placed on her family's background. I think her parents run an events company, so it's not as if they're like, top of the food chain, creme de la creme family of the United Kingdom. So it's just it does feel like she has been targeted relentlessly for being an American. I think, it's like that age-old thing. They're just pissed off that he didn't marry an Englishwoman and he went off with an American.
I wonder though, if it had been a British princess and had been Samuel L. Jackson that was being married into the British royal family, do you think it would have been quite as bad as this? Or do you think also the fact that it's a woman makes it even worse for the Brits to deal with?
That's a really interesting question. I think it would have been bad, but not as bad as this, because men do get treated differently, whatever people say. And I genuinely, you're like a lot of guys are saying, no, that's bullshit. But I personally think that being a woman and being half black just puts her at such a major disadvantage compared to being a man and half black and marrying into the royal family. Like, let's say if Eugenie was to marry someone.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, I'll put it this way. Prince Harry dated a lot of like strange women before he met Meghan. And I would argue I was quite impressed with Meghan because I think of all those girls that he and their families, by the way, had dubious backgrounds. One of them was the daughter of a South African businessman who had or Zimbabwean, I can't remember, who had strange links. So he actually married someone who's decent, hardworking, does a lot of good charitable work, is an advocate. He could have done a lot worse, but he married somebody that is actually somebody who women can look up to. I don't see what's wrong with that. I just think that he could have married a lot worse. Because
maybe that's the problem. Maybe she's outspoken. Maybe she is somebody that gives back, who doesn't give in, and that's what some areas I guess find difficult. They probably consider her a threat.
Yes. Yeah, possibly. I mean, it still doesn't excuse it. I mean, Jesus.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
It's obvious. Having read the interview transcripts and seeing some of the clips, it's very obvious that the boy is still traumatized by his mother's passing. And I think, it's also not untrue that men do marry women that remind them of their mothers. And I would argue that she's very much reminiscent of his mother, like, just in style and the way she is. And she's outspoken. She's American, oh my God, because American women are very expressive and they talk about their emotions. And, it's somewhat uncommon for Brits because we're far more reserved. I mean, I always laugh about this, but all my foreign friends agree with me on this. Dating a British guy is like a nightmare because they're so emotionally retarded. They're unable to just what is it that they want? They just cannot express themselves, whereas other men, it's like they're so expressive. I mean, it's like sometimes the Greeks are a bit too expressive, but at least they're telling you what they want or what they're thinking. With an English guy, you never know where you stand with them. Like you're constantly like, okay, what is this? It's not just me that says it, by the way. I have asked many foreign women.
No, please don't misunderstand my laughter, nor indeed my silence. You've just inspired yet another podcast, I think. This is definitely an interesting topic, and one which I'd like to have from at least a humorous perspective, because we talk a lot about gender, and unfortunately there's so much there's sort of so many negative issues to address that we don't often remember that there are some fun issues. This is sort of battle of the sexes. There is a positive, humorous approach to the differences that exist between these two specific genders, let alone all of the others. And so this is a humorous form, and I'd like to look at it more, actually, because what you say is quite interesting, especially for somebody like me who has grown up more or less considering himself a British boy. So that'll be interesting for me to sort of retrospectively look at how open I am in many ways. So, okay. Tatiana, as I said, there are many issues that we've discussed here that I hope we can go into in greater depth when we talk again. I think it's towards the end of March that we've decided, right?
Yes, I think so.
No, okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you that you've dedicated so much of your Sunday to this conversation as well. And it's always insightful what you contribute, and I look forward to many more sessions where you basically tell me how it is.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, Sakojan. And I look forward to our follow-up conversation at the end of the month.
Cool.
Thank you. Have a lovely Sunday.
You too. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.